Hi, I'm delighted to be able to introduce Kerry Kartchner today. Kerry is an old friend and is a friend of the university's as well. And sorry about that. And I think he's a living example of how an LDS person with deep spiritual beliefs can integrate the spiritual and the secular in his line of work, which is national security. I will read a little blurb about his background here and then turn the time over to him without further ado. With over 20 years of experience focusing on nuclear weapons policy and arms control in the field of national security affairs, Kerry M. Kartchner has served in such positions as Senior Representative of the U.S. Department of State to the U.S. component of the Standing Consultative Commission for the ABM Treaty in Geneva, Switzerland. He has served in the Office of Strategic and Theater Missile Defense in the Bureau of Arms Control. He has served as a senior advisor to Bureau and Department leadership regarding deterrence and strategic arms control issues. In May 2003, he was co-chair of a conference. He co-chaired it with me, by the way. Co-chair of a conference for Latter-day Saint national security professionals held in Washington, D.C. at the Milton A. Barlow Center. From 1986 to 1990, Kartchner worked as an assistant professor in the Department of National Security Affairs at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, where he taught courses on nuclear strategy and targeting, arms control and international relations, U.S.-Soviet relations, and NATO security. He is the author of such recent publications as Origins of the ABM Treaty, In Rockets' Red Glare, Missile Defense and the Future of World Politics, published in 2001, and Beyond the ABM Treaty, The Future of Offense-Defense Relationship, to be published in Arms Control, Cooperative Security in a Changing Environment. Kartchner received a bachelor's degree in international relations from BYU. So those of you who are pursuing an undergraduate degree in IR should take heart from this. And he received his master's and doctoral degrees both in international relations with emphases in foreign policy analysis and strategic studies from the University of Southern California. Join with me in welcoming Dr. Kartchner.
I want to extend my thanks to Corey Leonard and Valerie Hudson and also Marilyn Reynolds for making this visit possible, for extending this invitation to me. Thank you, Marilyn, for helping make the arrangements. First of all, I want to say that how fortunate you all are to have an institution like the Kennedy Center here. This is a marvelous institution and a wonderful thing for this university. Although I think you need a little more investment in some of the technical resources related to presentations here, but we will endure. I want to use this opportunity to talk about the missile defense program of the United States, which has been one of President Bush's highest priorities. But I want to take this opportunity to place it in the context of the overall question of the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. But I'll focus mostly on the missile defense program. And I hope to have some time after my remarks to listen to your questions and see if I can answer questions or comments that you have too. So we'll proceed. This is an overview of what I'll talk about. The main thing to keep in mind is that today's security environment is quite a bit different from what we came to be accustomed to during the Cold War. New threats are more complex. They're less predictable. That makes them more difficult to deter. Makes it more difficult to anticipate the kinds of problems that we have. More nations have or are seeking to acquire weapons of mass destruction and their ballistic missile means of delivery. Deterrence, and I can explain why, is sometimes problematic. That is, we don't always understand who it is we're trying to deter and how to deter them. that is one of the lessons that we derive from the September 11 experience, is that deterrence will not always work. But we believe that missile defenses, as one element of an overall approach, can contribute to promoting our nonproliferation goals and strengthening deterrence. Just in the spirit of being frank, I want to point out a word that changed on September 12th on this slide. On September 10th, this slide said the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and increasingly sophisticated means of delivery are the most urgent and dangerous threats we face. After September 11, we added among the most urgent. And you'll never guess which one was added to that. Terrorism. Terrorism became the number one concern after September 11th. But it was more than just terrorism. The concern of this administration is that the confluence of terrorism on the one hand and states that are seeking to acquire weapons of mass destruction on the other hand, and the fact that many of those states are state sponsors of terrorism, it's the confluence of those factors that is of most concern to this administration. And the response has been to try to formulate a comprehensive strategy for addressing all of those threats: the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, terrorism, and these rogue nations. In the aftermath of the September 11 attacks, this administration formulated and published a national strategy to combat weapons of mass destruction, and it outlined 3 pillars of that strategy, and they were counterproliferation, nonproliferation, and what we call consequence management, which is responding to a crisis or the possible use of weapons of mass destruction. These are some elements of that comprehensive strategy, and I'll explain how missile defense relates to each element of that. We see missile defense and nonproliferation as complementary elements of our overall strategy. Now, what I mean by that is that to the extent that our multilateral nonproliferation regimes and negotiations and agreements with other countries are successful, to that extent it will reduce the threat that our missile defenses are designed to respond to or to protect against. On the other hand, we also believe that missile defenses can contribute to nonproliferation. That is, if a rogue state contemplating devoting scarce resources to a ballistic missile program realizes that we will be able to counter that missile program with an effective regional missile defense capability, maybe they will be less inclined to go down the missile route. So that's the way we hope that missile defenses can be something that promotes our nonproliferation policy. Now, I know some have argued that the threat of ballistic missiles or the proliferation of ballistic missiles is actually decreasing. That is, that there are fewer states with ballistic missile programs, but in fact, there are more states. The intelligence community says 28 states, 28 nations now have ballistic missile programs, and of course that includes ballistic missiles of all ranges. Only a handful have long-range or intercontinental ballistic missiles. I saw a source recently that said 35 states have ballistic missile programs. But sometimes I'm asked, why do we consider some of those programs a threat? Or why would countries spend that kind of money on a ballistic missile program? Well, here's a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, the leaders of both North Korea and Iran have publicly stated that developing a peaceful space launch capability is a national priority. In fact, Iran last year established a national space agency to promote this objective of developing the ability to place payloads in orbit. Now, once a country develops the ability to place a payload in orbit, they effectively have an intercontinental weapons delivery capability. It's very hard to distinguish a peaceful space launch program from a weapons delivery ICBM program. There's just a couple of things technically that distinguish those programs, but it's very easy to develop a long-range missile weapons delivery capability under the guise of a peaceful space launch program. Now, our concern is, okay, North Korea and Iran have publicly said they want to develop a long-range missile capability. Well, we believe both of those countries are covertly developing, or at least providing the basis for developing nuclear weapons too. So if they develop an ICBM capability and nuclear weapons, then they will have the means to threaten the United States and its allies. Now, the U.S. intelligence community says that ballistic missiles may not be the best way to attack defense. In fact, non-missile means are probably more likely to be used to attack the United States than ballistic missiles. In fact, they say, truck bombs, suitcase bombs, or short-range missile fire from a barge, or something like that, delivering an attack against the United States like that is actually more likely. However, that leaves the question open, why are all these countries spending enormous resources on ballistic missile programs? And the reason is, and the intelligence community goes on to say, however, that missiles confer a degree of prestige, coercion, and deterrence that other means of delivering weapons of mass destruction do not. So there's the motivation for those kinds of programs. Sometime after the United States withdrew from the ABM Treaty, President Bush announced on December 17th of 2002, this is a mistake in this slide, it should say 2002, that the U.S. was going to proceed towards developing or deploying a ground-based and a sea-based missile defense program, and this is what it's going to look like. 20 ground-based mid-course interceptors, that is, missiles interceptors deployed in silos, 16 of which will be at Fort Greely, Alaska, and 4 of them will be at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. We hope to have, by December of this year, 20 interceptors on 3 Aegis cruisers. We will procure additional Patriot Advanced Capability 3 units. Those are the ones that we used in the Operation Iraqi Freedom last year. And it will involve upgraded sensors and radars. Now, I thought it might be useful for you to see some pictures of these programs taking shape. So we've incorporated into this some pictures. The following photographs will be from the construction taking place at Fort Greely in Alaska. The photos are courtesy of Boeing. This is the construction of a corridor between facilities at Fort Greely in Alaska. This is how people will get back and forth between different buildings and through which the electronic cables and communications will run. This is the control building that's being constructed at Fort Greely, Alaska. This is the drilling of one of the silos, and the way this works is they first of all take a 3-foot in diameter bit, and they just drill a core hole about 40 feet deep, And then they insert this other bit that goes out 9 feet. And it just goes down and drills out a 9-foot in diameter hole. And they did 10 of these over the course of this past year and expect to do 6 more this spring. They have a fairly narrow construction period because for much of the year this remains frozen. But this shows some of the progress at Fort Greely. That's one of the silos. This is what will be inserted into that silo. And then these are manufactured in the continental United States and shipped by barge from Vancouver, Washington, up to Alaska. This is the silo, actually, that will be inserted into those slots. This is a picture of that being put into the silo being put into the shaft. And this is what the missile will be inserted into. So it's actually a fairly straightforward and a very quick construction process to put those in place. This is at Vandenberg Air Force Base. This is the missile assembly building. I've actually been inside of that building about 12 years ago when it was being used to assemble other missiles, the MX missile. You may recall that episode. Now, this says interceptor assembly, but these are actually target missiles that are going to be used as targets for the interceptors. This is a silo at Vandenberg Air Force Base. It says interceptor mechanical pathfinder. What that is it's an inert missile that is a model of the interceptor missile, but it's used for test and evaluation purposes, and it simulates the interceptor. And this is one of those silo sleeves being inserted into a silo at Vandenberg Air Force Base. Now, to support this missile defense system and the testing of it, we needed an X-band radar. An X-band radar is a very powerful radar with a very narrow search beam that's used to discriminate between actual warheads and countermeasures or debris associated with that warhead. And the Missile Defense Agency wanted an X-band radar, but they wanted it on a platform that could be moved around so that they could test at different locations, test from Alaska, test from Kwajalein, perhaps test off the coast of Japan. So they had Boeing go and purchase an ocean-going, self-propelled, semi-submersible oil drilling rig from Norway. They purchased this from Norway, and it's about 8 or 9 stories high just from the water level, and about 3 more stories down underneath the water. What I like about this picture, it gives you a sense of the scale of it. And this is it being towed. It was towed from Norway to Corpus Christi, Texas, where it's being outfitted. Then it's going to be sailed around the tip of South America because it's too big to go through the Panama Canal. And it will be ported in California. And that is actually where they'll install a great big dome with the radar on it. And then this thing can be towed, or it can even go on its own power to wherever they need this radar for test purposes. It's pretty amazing thing. And it's only costing about $800 million. And I think we should have 2 for that price. I think. It's at a city along the coast of California is where it's actually going to be home base. It's home base. Several cities in California and Alaska competed for the right to have it home base. So that gives you, the reason I wanted to show those is to give you a sense that this program has taken on a tangible character, and there's hardware being developed and built for this. Now, over the past year, there's been another exciting development in this program, and it's the one that I'm most closely associated with, and that is our effort to solicit assistance and cooperation from our friends and allies in this program. President Bush has made it very clear from the beginning of his administration that he wants this missile defense program to be able to protect friends and allies as well. In fact, he said very early on, we are not interested in deploying a missile defense system that separates us from our allies. See, our allies were concerned that if we developed a missile defense system and became protected by it, we would be less willing to stick our necks out to help them. So we have been at pains to assure them that this missile defense system will be of benefit to them as well. So about a year and a half ago, or 2 years, we sent out a series of high-level delegations to our key allies and friends and solicited their cooperation in the missile defense program, asked them for ideas about how they could participate, what they could contribute to it, and that is beginning to pay off. Here are some recent examples of international cooperation on missile defense. In April of last year, the United Kingdom approved our request for permission to upgrade the Filing Dale's early warning radar. Now, the reason that was such a critical issue is because that radar is located in a very geographically significant location, but it also happens to be located in a national park of the United Kingdom. And so there were a lot of sensitivities associated with that facility. And we assured the United Kingdom that we were not building new facilities, we were not interested in expanding the territory or the fence line of that facility. The kind of upgrades that we are now engaged in there will give that radar more powerful, longer range capabilities. In June of last year, the government of the United Kingdom announced that it had made a decision to join with the United States in a partnership to develop the missile defense program. And so we signed a memorandum of understanding. That's what MOU stands for. And then last month, the Japanese government announced a decision to spend a substantial sum of money on acquiring their own missile defense system. And that will consist of the purchase of some number of Aegis cruisers that will have a missile interception capability on them. They also want to buy the Patriot Advanced Capability 3 missile that we used in the Gulf War. And we're in the process of negotiating a memorandum of understanding with Japan. Also last month, Australia made a decision to join with the United States and cooperate on missile defense development. And this month, Canada announced a formal decision on the part of its government to participate with the United States in the development of a missile defense program. The Canada connection is very important to us because of the role that we see NORAD playing in a missile defense system. And NORAD, of course, is an alliance between the United States and Canada. So that became very important to us to have their cooperation. But here are some other examples of some pre-existing missile defense cooperation programs. For many years now, we have been in a partnership with Germany and Italy to develop something called the Medium Extended Air Defense System, or MEADS. And that will be a intermediate range battlefield missile defense system designed to protect deployed troops. It doesn't have the range necessary to protect a continent from intercontinental range ballistic missiles, but it can protect deployed forces from Scud-type missiles. That's what that will do. Israel has, in a joint program with the United States, developed a shorter range missile defense system called the Arrow. And in fact, there is now something called the Arrow 2. And they have already deployed units of this missile defense interceptor in Israel. And it's designed to intercept very short-range missiles. So that's what, and it has actually a pretty successful test program backing it up. We have had a number of missile defense cooperation agreements with Russia, one of which is called the Russian-American Observation Satellite, or RAMOS. And that is a program to put up 2 observation satellites that will be jointly operated by Russia and the United States that will give both countries early warning and surveillance capabilities that they will then share together. We've also engaged in several theater missile defense exercises with Russia, and we are now negotiating with Russia, or in consultations with Russia, on some other missile defense cooperation programs which we hope will bear fruit in the near future. Not many people realize that NATO has a long history of involvement in missile defense, dating back to 1991 and 1992. Last year, 2 contractor teams completed a theater missile defense feasibility study for NATO. And this was to look at what NATO needed to do to deploy intermediate range ballistic missile defense to protect deployed forces out of area. So if they sent forces to the Persian Gulf or to Afghanistan, they would be protected against ballistic missile attack. Well, a year ago in November, at a summit of NATO ministers in Prague, they also agreed to look at what NATO needs to do to protect NATO population and territory. Now, that was a big step, especially for the French government, who had been skeptical of the usefulness of a missile defense system. But I've spent considerable time over the last 2 years in both Paris and in Berlin talking with our allies about missile defense. And the French have actually made a very interesting kind of about-face on missile defense. For a long time, they said missile defense would undermine deterrence. But now they are beginning to see how it might contribute to enhancing deterrence. So that's an important development on the part of a key ally. This administration has kind of formulated 4 missions for our security forces: the assurance, dissuasion, deterrence, and defense missions. And this is how they view missile defense contributing to those 4 missions: assuring friends and allies of the strength of our commitment to their defense and security, dissuading states from proliferating offensive missile programs, deterring other states from using ballistic missiles to attack the United States, and if those 3 things fail, defending or defeating ballistic missile attack. So this is the notional objectives of our missile defense efforts. Let me conclude by saying that the new security environment means we cannot be confident of being able to always deter threats to the United States, its forces deployed abroad, or our friends and allies. The threat of ballistic missile attack is growing as these nations continue to improve the accuracy, range, and reliability of their ballistic missile programs. We face a concern with both rogue states and terrorist groups, sometimes sponsored by those states. But we are encouraged by the fact that international cooperation and support for missile defense is growing, and we appreciate the support of these allies who have made formal decisions, often difficult decisions politically, to join with the United States in developing a missile defense program. And we believe that missile defenses can make an important contribution to enhancing deterrence and to promoting our nonproliferation objectives. Now, with that, I'd like to begin taking your questions, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. And I'm told that we will have a roving microphone. No?